Hello. Okay, so we're coming back to this series on uh, technique spotlight, on spotlighting techniques. And I thought for the next two videos, I will go into parents because there seems to be confusion around that. And also there are specific techniques about how to find what to look for around parents. A lot of things that you tend to see on Reddit are questions about why do I have problems with my family, or what does this say about? Oh, or really, what you see often is you see panicked parents with their newborns seeing some kind of negative thing in the fourth house and saying, "Oh my God, I'm scared because I see Saturn in the fourth. Does that mean he's gonna fucking hate us?" And it's like, not if you behave. but so notice that. Oh, first of all, I want you to notice one thing: parents, on the condition of the parents and their accidents. So he doesn't specify fathers, even though later on he kind of does. So fitting to make mention subsequently of the matter of parents. Okay, so fourth house is both parents, but he does then go into specifically the father and the mother. And so he then quotes Omar and says, Omar says you need to look at the fourth sign from the ascendant. Omar was more than likely using whole sign, but we could obviously do both. You look at the cusp of the fourth and the whole sign fourth. Um, it's Lord, part of fathers. That doesn't include mother, right? And from the sun by day and Saturn by night. So those are the those are all significators for father. Those don't have anything to do with the mother. Later in this chapter on the fourth house, he lists what you should be looking at for the mother, and it's not any of those significators. For indeed you will, and then okay, so that's our list, or that's Omar's list rather. And then he goes on and he says, you will look at each of these places and consider their almubtas. You're not going to you're not going to just look at the actual planet or cusp or whatever. You're actually going to find the planet who has the most dignity in that degree of that sign, and you're going to use that whoever is the strongest of those to then be the significator for one of the significators for father. Now, this is just one of the main techniques. Now, really, we just looked at two techniques. The first technique was look at these things, right? Fourth house or cusp of the fourth sign or cusp of the fourth house. It's Lord, part of fathers. Obviously, it's Lord, but he doesn't mention it here. The sun by day, Saturn by night. Okay. But here, and remember, you should always be looking at more than one thing to come to a judgment. You should never be just looking at one. I mean, everybody's looking for a fucking shortcut, right? But the more you look for a shortcut, the more likely we are to be wrong. So it's better to find more than one. First of all, it's like it's better to find more than one significator because one, it gives you the ability to combine what's going on. You have a Jupiter in Gemini, you've got a Mars in Taurus or something. You've got those are energies that then, I mean, I hate using that area fucking language, but those are things. It's kind of like two tarot cards that can be kind of put together and their meanings melded together to come to an idea. And we're going to actually look at doing that. But so we're going to actually get to what I'm talking about. But then also noting kind of what's involved or how they're involved in what I call the local determination, or what Robert Zoller calls the local determination of each planet. Gives us a clue. We're going to look at all of this in a second. So Al-Mubtaz, what the hell does that mean? And Al-Mubtaz means the winner. And so we needs to see who has the most points in that degree. And for figuring that out, one has to be using, and I hope everybody is familiar with this essential dignity chart. So the essential planetary dignities. So there are we say a planet is essentially dignified when it's in a sign that it owns or a sign in which it is exalted. And so we can say, oh, it's an essential dignity. But there are five essential dignities, and they have kind of a descending importance and power. So the first is domicile, which has 5 points of power. Exaltation has four. Triplicity, which means also element, has three. Terms, which are five unequal kind of divisions of the 30 degrees of a sign. Each of those are owned by a planet. So those are terms of each planet. Those get 2 points, and then the decans get one. And so potentially for every degree of the zodiac, potentially there are five planets who have some form or some amount of dignity in every degree. And in some degrees, only one planet or only two planets or only. And so it's very interesting to look at that and look at who is involved in that degree. Right. So, for instance, let's say I'm in the seventh degree of Aries. So Mars has 5 points because he's the ruler. The sun has 4 points because he's the exaltation ruler. Let's say it's daytime. The sun gets another 3 points. That makes him, or that makes this, remember, we're talking about the winner, almutens, right? The sun gets another 3 points. Then it's worth, what I say, seven. So Venus is between six and owns the area between 6 and 12. So Venus gets 2 points. And then it's Mars owns the first decadent. So Mars gets 6 points, 5 and 1. Sun gets 7 points, seven, and so the sun would be the almutaz or winner at 7 degrees of Aries, right? So we're gonna look at a little of that. We're not going to do it for every single one, but we're going to just look at a little bit of this going forward. So we're going to go back now we're now going to go to the charts, and we're just going to kind of do that little thing. And once again, I want to kind of bring up this idea of incorporating the part of Father, and I will kind of give us an idea of how to do so. So, what are the areas he said? He said the fourth sign or cusp of the fourth. This is Billie Holiday's chart. Yeah, Billie Holiday's chart. So I've got a bunch of different people. And they're all musicians. I've got Ruth Slenzinska, who's a famous pianist and whose father was a tyrant who forced her to be a child prodigy, and so and with violence and starving her if she didn't practice for 8 9 hours a day. I mean, beating her if she didn't do things. I mean, just crazy. So obviously we want to look at that chart. Judy Garland, whose father was more than likely gay, and scandalized, kind of scandalized and got caught doing kind of scandalous stuff in every place that they went until finally he and the mother broke up. And obviously, when we get to mother, we can look at the mother. The mother was a very malefic influence in Judy Garland's life, and got her was one of the influences that got her hooked on drugs. We've got Natalie Wood, whose mother was, I think, a little bit fucking nuts, and I guess she was. They were, and also was the classic stage mother. Natalie Wood, of course, is in the famous. I'm watching it right now. The famous movie Miracle on 34th Street, which is one of the great Christmas films ever made, and she's probably seven, six, seven, or eight in that movie. So it's she's kind of immortalized as a child, and then obviously later grew up and did different things. But so her mother was under an obsession that she would be that she would be kidnapped, and so she wasn't allowed to go out. She wasn't allowed to have friends. She wasn't allowed to socialize. Her life was completely controlled until probably she was a late teenager, and then of course she was in the Hollywood system. And then Ella Fitzgerald, whose mother died, and whose stepfather was kind of a brute, who was physically abusive. So I thought we'd use that. And now back to Billie Holiday. So starting with Billie Holiday, I think the person I started with was Lenzinska. So I was going to work with her because that's the actual chart that I did the calculations for. So the place that they want us to look at is places they want us to look at are the cusp of the fourth. Oh, another Aquarius rising chart, huh? Interesting, like Billie Holiday. Cusp of the fourth or fourth sign, obviously they are the same here. What is it? The sun by day. It's daytime. The sun is above the horizon. This is the line of the horizon. So when the horizon is above this, rather when the sun is above the horizon, it's a daytime chart. Saturn by night, though. However, the part of father. Right, so not that many things, right? Not that many things to look at. So the first thing I would do is I would look to see what kind of condition, well, look, we're going to get to the part of father in a second, but what kind of condition are the things we're talking about? Obviously, a cusp can only receive aspects, and here, this is this Lenzinska. So here it's receiving the trine from the moon and the square from the sun, right? And it's daytime. So the square from the sun is the is the daytime significator for is the daytime significator for the fourth house, right? Or for the father. So it's receiving the square from the sun and the trine from the moon. I don't remember if the mother was around at all. And she may have died early or in childbirth or something like that. And the father just decided that he wanted to have a child prodigy pianist who he was going to push and make famous, going to live off of that, the proceeds of this child prodigy. But note that there's Taurus on the cusp of the fourth. There's a Venus sign. Venus is the music. Venus and Taurus is singing, and so Venus is already music. Note that the sun is in Capricorn. Right, so that's our second significator that we would be looking at anywhere, or third or fourth significator that we've been looking at. The ruler of the fourth is Venus, who's also in Capricorn. These are both in signs ruled by Saturn, and which we're going to come to in a second. Saturn is the nighttime significator, but it's daytime, so the primary we'd be looking at is the sun. Note that he's in the 12th house. The sun is in the 12th, and Capricorn is on the cusp of the 12th. And so that's an important, and which puts the Jupiter, the fallen Jupiter there, right? And Jupiter is virtue, so that means that this person would see a lack of it more than likely in their life, right? There'd be deficits in the Jupiterian area in mercy, and Jupiterian mercy. Jupiter is mercy. Jupiter is benevolence and kindness, and welcome. And so this person, we can already kind of see with the Jupiter there that there'd be a little bit of that gone, right? A little bit of that would be gone. Here we have the Saturn. The Saturn is the ruler of the ascendant, right? So that's the person themselves. First house is the house of life. So, uh, but note that almost everything is ruled by Saturn, except for Mars, right? All of this stuff is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is in a sign ruled by Mars, and Mars is in his own sign. Moon is the only one of the seven who's not involved in not ruled by either of those planets. So this is important in my opinion because the Mars in Aries, that's a very, very aggressive Mars, right? That can, and at its worst, it can be a very violent. It can be a violent Mars, and obviously Scorpio is a sign of deep control and agenda, a control and agenda, and Saturn also is a control and agenda. So let's look and see where the part of fortune is. So already and also Saturn is the ruler of the first and 12th, and the 12th and the sixth house deal with servitude and slavery. Note that the moon is the ruler. So the moon is the co-ruler of everything. In this particular chart, she's the ruler of the sixth. So we know hard times, going through something difficult. So anyway, well, let's look and see the part of the father. So that's taken by day from the place of the sun to the place of Saturn. This is an Arabic part, and the parts, they basically project the distance between two significators from the ascendant or some other place. Okay? And the two significators we're using are the sun and Saturn, who are the two significators for father. So, Capricorn and Scorpio are 60 degrees away, even though it looks like they're 90 degrees. They're 60 degrees away, and 12 degrees also plus or minus 12 degrees, right? So we go back 60 to 25 Scorpio or 26 Scorpio, and then we go back another 12 to 14 Scorpio. Where is that? Right here on the on the person. And so that right here on the ruler of the ascendant, right? So the part of father is on the person is on the part of father. So that's something to be looking at. What planet is on, first of all, on that particular part? right? Pay attention to that first. The next thing is we can look to see what kind of aspects. Now, remember, aspects are there's more than one type, right? There's applying aspects, there are separating aspects, and then there are kind of whole sign aspects that are kind of like glances, right? That we can look at too. So we take as for a planet or a cusp or something like that. Well, not the cusp so much, but for a planet, we can take in more kind of general types of aspects. But for this, let's see, so what did we say? It was 14 Scorpio, right? And we already see the Saturn here. What's going on with this Saturn, right? Because it's going to give us an idea. Oh, that's right, I remember. Okay, so here's a really interesting thing, which means that obviously, right, if it's 14 Scorpio, it means that Mars is the ruler of the father, right, of the part of father, which makes perfect sense. And one of the reasons it makes perfect sense is because the part of father, or rather the ruler of the part of father, is in the third house, which rules the hands. A pianist uses their hands. There'd be a tyranny over this person's hands of some sort, right? Mars in Aries can be a tyrant, right? So there could be a tyranny over it, kind of in the hands, or threat of violence as a result of the hands, or fear, fear and violence and and terror as a result of the hands. And note also that eighth house, which is also kind of that fear and terror, the moon is there, right? So the moon is the other significator for the person and for everything, but the moon is there in the eighth, and Mercury is the ruler of the hands. Mercury, who rules Virgo, is also the ruler of the hands. He rules Gemini. Well, Gemini also rules the arms and hands, but the third house rules the hands. And Mars is the ruler of the hands, and also remember Mars is action. And so he was constantly making her practice. I think she might have practiced it. I know at least 8 hours, sometimes as much as 12 to 13. So he just had her practicing all day long. There is that Mars, that active Mars and the hands. But what's going on with Saturn was my question. What's going on with this? With this cusp of the part of Father and Mars, or the Saturn and this Mars. We are looking at a very, very close example of antition. And so I don't know if you all know what an antisha is, Antisha, but it's 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 seasonal because it's places where there's the same amount of light during different times of year. So when there's basically, for instance, the equinox, that's when night and day are equal. It's basically, it has to do with that. So for instance, there's the same amount of light between let's start from Aries, between Aries and Virgo. So that means that if we split the 30 degrees in this particular case, if we split the 30 degrees, then Mars at 16 degrees of Virgo would be looking for 14. I mean, Mars at 16 degrees of Aries would be looking at 14 degrees of Virgo. Actually, but it's not happening. It's happening between Mars and Saturn, and it's not actually happening. So what I thought I saw isn't actually happening. So Saturn's just kind of alone there, which kind of interesting. Kind of alone there, not really. He's getting glances. He's getting glances from the stuff, and Jupiter really is the closest thing that's coming, but Jupiter can't really give a lot of help, right? Jupiter can only really be more Saturnian, and so the Jupiter is kind of there. Right? Jupiter is at 6, Saturn's at 13, so Jupiter's applying to Saturn very widely, but and Mercury is applying to Jupiter quite widely as well, right? But that's it. That's really kind of all that's going on. That's all that's kind of happening. The Jupiter to the Saturn, this weak Jupiter, weak 11th, weak ruler of the 11th, right? Which is the good fortune, good spirit rather. So that's interesting, right? Because the good spirit. And Jupiter is right, also loves the 11th, although he's really in the 12th, right? Because it's 7 degrees of Capricorn. So Jupiter really belongs to the 12th, which makes more sense, right? That makes a lot of sense. This person was really a prisoner. This person was a prisoner of her father. You know, he was a vicious warden. This terrible, vicious warden. And note once again that the Aquarius rising will also give you the ruler. Well, Saturn will be the ruler of the first and the 12th, right? So the difficulties, the self-undoings, all that will happen. And of course, even the sun is visibility, right? And the sun is visibility and fame, and that's what the father was looking for, right? Sun is also a significator for father, right? And that's what the father was looking for, and that's he was giving her all this problem. Um, he was giving her all this, and the square to the cusp that I was looking at, so it's interesting how it kind of shows it and how everything goes back ultimately to Mars, right? Because if everything here goes back to Saturn, Saturn's in Scorpio, and it all goes back to this Mars that can either be valiant and courageous, and obviously this is something that she had to learn, or it can be a tyrant, a raging tyrant, which is the projected version that she was experiencing around action that had to happen with her hands. I'm wondering if there's a brother. I think there's only her, but this would point to a brother because Mars is the ruler of brothers, and he's the ruler of the third of siblings, and then he's in the third house of siblings. So it points to a brother. So I'll look when we get to brothers. We'll come back and see about Ruth Lenzenska. But we've got more interesting people when we're looking at brothers and sisters. We've got Warren Beatty and Shirley MacLaine, and we've got a bunch of interesting people to do that with. But we will come back because this seems to be indicating brothers. But right now, it's really as the ruler of the part of father. It's really pointing to Mars. Okay, so we see how we used just the significators themselves. Okay, we used just the significators that were listed. Now they say, look at who is the ruler, the almutin over those things, right? And so I'm not going to make you go through it the whole thing, but let's just for what's the degree of the 22 Leo, or no, what is it? 22 Taurus. Venus, Moon, it's daytime. Venus, okay, so that means she gets 7 points. 22. Jupiter, Saturn, right? So that's 5 different points in that degree, or four. Venus, Moon, Jupiter, Saturn all have some dignity, and it's descending dignity in that degree, right? So, but the winner is Venus because it's daytime. So, sure enough, that's who we would look to. So, we're looking to see who we would choose for the significator of the Father out of all of these things. This is just one technique. Then, what is next? We would be looking at the part of Father, right? Or its Lord. We look at Venus, the Lord. But let's go to the part of Father, which was at 14 Scorpio. And so that would be Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the Sun. Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the Sun. So the Sun is Mars is the winner because he's got five points. And so nobody else it gets as many. So Mars is the winner. And already, I mean, except for the fact that he's not angular, right? We wish that he were angular, but he's so specific to what we're talking about. Third house rules the hands. This obviously is the significator that we would use, right? I mean, Venus obviously is another one because the subject was music. And also note that Capricorn is the exaltation of Mars. So all of this stuff goes back to these two planets, Saturn and Mars. Saturn, but of course, is the significator for her. But we also know Saturn is the ruler of the 12th, which would be whatever would capture her or could imprison her or could undo her, right? And also that Saturn is a significator for father by night, right? It's a significator for father. The Saturn has its own significations of limitation and heaviness and cruelty and coldness. And so, I mean, Mars, of course, is more known for cruelty and like cruelty through violence, but Saturn is cruelty through withdrawal of love and affection and coldness, right? So what we really have going on, and anything going on with there's this separating sextile or square rather, with the sun, Mars. This separating sextile with the sun. I mean, not sextile, square with the sun, who's what? The significator for father. It's separating, it's far, 9 degrees, and so it's, there's no longer a really strong connection. But what did I say? There's more than one kind of aspect that we can look at. We can look at the applying, which of course is the most important. We can look at the separating, which we can see kind of how much effect is really still happening, and then we can look at the whole sign, which is just kind of shows a general kind of influence or possibility, or shows also that it's supported, right? Planets or the moon. If the moon is in a sign where she's not receiving any kind of glance, where nothing is looking at her, she's called feral, or any planet is called feral, and they don't have any aid. They're just kind of they're kind of like a tiger or a lion or a leopard in the jungle. They're just kind of out there doing whatever, and it will show up in how they deal with people and with relationships. Anyway, and there are feral signs too. Anyway, so that would be, in my opinion, even though, like I said, it's not in any kind of like the planets here would make the most sense, right? Venus is in her own triplicity here, so she actually gets 3 points for being in triplicity, even though Saturn or Mars would be the winner. We can look what 0 degrees. I think Mercury's the rule of that first. So it's Saturn, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, right? So Saturn is the ruler. Saturn is the winner of this degree of Capricorn, right? But Mars, of course, has power because he has 4 points too, right? So as I said, everything kind of comes back to that, to this kind of possibility of a very violent, sharp objects, loud noises, sharp objects. I think the father we can see, and also note, Sun and Mars are the fire planets. They're the choleric planets, which they fly off the handle. They are hotheads. They would rather fight than reason. So you've got, even like I said, once again, even though we've got this is a separating and a wide separating aspect, even going towards like close to a full or a whole sign aspect, this still gives us an idea of what's going on there. Or of what's the Sun Mars square. That's ugly. That can be ugly. That can be very aggressive, right? That can be very aggressive, right? So aggressive. Mars is aggression. So we've got, Mars has some rulership over six of the over four, one, two, three, four, five of the seven, right? He's got five of the seven classical planets. He's got some rulership as exaltation ruler over these four, and then as domicile ruler of those five, of that one. Okay, so that's a way of, also now at some point I will do something specifically about the parts, and we'll look at, because I don't really know enough about the father's life, but we'll looking at the parts of from as ascendants, right? This already gives us a really strong idea, because obviously we would be looking for, where is their child in relation to the cusp of or in relation to the part of children, or part of the parents or part of father. Where is the child? We would do that same thing here in relation to, where is the child, or what's the relationship between the significator for the father, in this case Venus, and the significator of the child, in this case Saturn, right? And is there any, would be a sextile, but we can see that even though there's this sextile, that this Venus this Scorpio is the detriment of Venus, right? The Scorpio is the detriment of Venus. So Venus wouldn't be like Saturn, Venus or Saturn, yeah, Venus wouldn't be liking Saturn, right? And that makes sense, right? Because Venus is the father and Saturn is the child. But Venus wouldn't be receiving the child. So Venus there wouldn't be good enough. This is another thing. It's looking at the receptions between planets, despite the aspect. Despite the aspect, looking at the reception despite the aspect. This is a sextile, a possible sextile, right? But the problem is that Venus doesn't like Scorpio, right? Saturn likes Capricorn, but so Saturn receives Venus, but Venus does not receive Saturn. Venus does not receive Saturn. So even just that gives us an idea of maybe when we're going to look at it with one more chart. We're going to do one more chart because this, as you can see, this takes a little bit longer. We can't do quite as many charts as we did. We might do, or we maybe I'll just make this a little bit longer. I wanted to look at Judy Garland next. But you see, so we chose that Mars is going to be the significator for father based on that technique. Now it goes further. It goes further and says, oh, you're going to direct that significator to the benefics or the malefics in order to see how long the person will live and whatever else. And then there's this whole other thing about finding a high leg, and we'll so maybe well actually let's look at that next. Yeah, before we move on, let's look at that technique next. So it looks like this is going to be a longer one. Sorry. Okay, so what he says was you're going to looking for the almutens, and then you operate through that, and he lists off which we would be looking at. For by that one through which you have operated, you can know the space of the life of the father of the native. Okay, whether it is going to be long or short, and more restrictedly, the father, more restrictedly, if the father is not known because the life of the parent varies and therefore said, blah, 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 blah. Okay, for indeed, the stronger of them will be he who is in an angle not removed from the cusp of the angle by more, right? Oh, look at that. Remember, we were just talking about it the last one, the most, is the most active part of a house. He says, in an angle not removed from the cusp of the angle by 3 ahead or 5 behind. 5 behind is 5 degrees before the cusp. 3 ahead is 3 before, right? So he's talking about the most active part. So the most active part actually starts 5 degrees before the cusp of any angle. Right, so that's he's making that very clear. Or who is in the succeedance, right? So basically, it needs to be what's the word? It needs to be advancing. In that particular case, Mars was not advancing. Oh, the only planet's really advancing is Venus, right? Which on some point makes a lot of sense too, but not as strong as the Mars, who I also think is a good significator for that. So that is that part of it. But then it says, and if you want to see, after you've looked at the quantity, if you wanted to know oh shit, sorry, what kind of condition his life is going to have, how's the life going to be? Then you will look at the degree of the part of the father and the fourth and the degree of the sun or Saturn, right? And you will look at him to see who is the helage. Now, I'm coming back to the charts. So it was only those three, right? It was only the cusp of the fourth, the part, the cusp of the fourth, the part of father, and the and what was the third? Oh, the sun. In this case, the sun. So what was this? What's this whole helage thing? The helage is what we know as the high leg, and it is usually taken in order to figure out how much quotient of life is in a chart, and it's figured out based on one of these five significators: the sun, the moon, the ascendant, the part of fortune, and the previous new or full moon. Okay, so those are the 5 points by which you figure out which one of those five is the high leg, or there is no high leg in a chart, right? And it's basically one of the first things they would do when a baby was born in this period, to figure out if the baby was going to live. So you look for the high leg. It's basically the high leg. These all of these techniques, and I have a video about it. It's basically, I think the first one was it's life expectancy. So you look at the high leg, and then by figuring out who the high leg is, you then are able to figure out how long they are lived based on the planets that are connected to them. And in order for there to be a high leg, that high leg has to be that planet or those five things have to be aspected by one of their main planets. One of the planets that's important to them. One of the planets that's dignified, like the sun with Saturn, right. So what are the places? One of them is this 21 Taurus, right? Fourth house. The other is 14 Scorpio, right? And then the third one is the sun, right? Because it's daytime. So the sun kept. So which one can be the high leg? The only one that can be the high leg is the one who's receiving an aspect by one of its five, well, one of the lords of its five essential dignities, especially the domicile exaltation, and preferably two of the lesser. Okay, so we saw those five: domicile, exaltation, triplicity, term, and face, right? And that means that domicile and exaltation are strong enough on their own, but triplicity and term and face, they really should be combined if they're going to be strong, right? So let's see here. Taurus is, and we're not using the strong, we're not using the like really major aspect like partile aspects. It can be a whole sign type thing that we just, or I mean, obviously if there is a real aspect happening, an application, then that's even better and that's stronger, but in this case, we're looking at points. So if we remember, this was what 22 Taurus, it was Venus, Moon, Jupiter, no, yeah, Jupiter, Moon, Venus, Moon, Venus, Jupiter, Moon, Venus, Moon, Jupiter, Moon, Venus, Moon, Jupiter, wait, Venus, Moon, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Moon, no, no, sorry, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. Sorry about that. Venus, Moon, Jupiter, Saturn. Who is it receiving anything? It's receiving a whole sign aspect from Venus and Jupiter. All right. So that could possibly work. Right, and then it's receiving the square from that. It's receiving the trine from that. Moon is, Moon is one of the exaltation ruler. So yeah, the fourth cusp could work as it. And then let's see what else could work. We've got 14 Scorpio. Obviously, Mars has nothing to do with that. He's the only ruler. He's the only real ruler. At 14, we also have Mercury and the Sun, but right, they don't really have strong enough rulership. The Sun does, Mercury does. So Mercury is the closest to kind of having any. The Sun and Mercury are the closest to having any, but they're not really strong enough to do it. It's looking like the cusp of the fourth would be would be the real kind of thing. Looking at kind of what's going on with the father would be through the cusp of the fourth, which obviously it means its Lord, right? Because there's nothing in the fourth house. So, and then what was the third? The sun. Well, that might even be better, right? Because the sun's receiving that sextile, or you leaving that sextile. It's really the sun, isn't it? This is the sun is the okay. This is the significator for father, or the high leg for father. Why? Because of this square, right? And that so doesn't once again we in that first one we came, in my opinion, we came to Mars, even though it said, hey, the strongest is going to be the one that's either in a succeedant or in an angle, right? But I was like, this is way too specific to the hands. I think that really is the one. Now we see that the high leg for father, right? The high leg for father is the sun. So it brings us to this kind of this separating square again between this cholera, this work, right? Saturn is labor, and Mars is anger or tyranny. Can be anger or tyranny, right? So I think that's a very interesting thing that we came to, looking at these two planets become main significators for the situation with father, right? Taking it outside of, what planet's in the fourth, or what planet rules it. Obviously, this rules it, and Venus is music, right? So, and Capricorn is work, right? So Venus and in her dreams, right? This is the house of her future dreams. There's the father, right? So interesting just to kind of see it. Okay, so now that we know the techniques, we can get a little faster and I think we'll look at Judy Garland and then we'll finish. So the first thing that we wanted to do was look at the different, what was it, the fourth cusp, its ruler, and note, look, this is the closest aspect in the chart. This opposition between, once again, Sun and Mars. And now, why wasn't this father mean? Why wasn't this father mean and violent? But there definitely is some bullshit going on for this father, right? Mars is the ruler of what? Mars is the ruler of the ninth and the fourth. Wouldn't it? Well, not in this chart, but it would be the fourth sign, but the fourth, right? So it would be creating some kind of issue there, some kind of issue with those, but with the fourth, and as I mentioned, they had to move often. Well, first of all, they were performers. They were all performers, and but they had to move often because he was constantly getting caught in places and like cruising places and getting arrested for being gay and having and then losing his reputation. And I think he worked in churches too, and so he couldn't continue working in the churches and whatever. But oh, ninth house, that's right. I think he was an organist in churches, and as well as they were doing vaudeville, and he also worked in churches. And then he so yeah, that there. So he had to leave, move house, and problems with religion. So there we go, right? There we go. This so it's not necessarily specific to our person that we're talking about, or rather, we'll see, right? So that's our first indicator, and we don't have to look further for the natural significator, right? Because it's daytime, so it's really the Sun and Saturn. So now we'll look at the part of Father. I mean, Sun. I'm sorry. It's Leo and the Sun, and then we'll look for the part of Father. Sun to Saturn is so 18. So Gemini to Libra is 120 degrees minus 18, right? So minus 18. So we're going to project that from here, which is 28 Gemini. So 120 degrees is Gemini, is back to Libra, 28 degrees, and minus 18 brings us to 10 degrees of Gemini. So pretty much right on this Jupiter, right? The ruler of our ascendant is Mercury. So it's not, we don't have a similar kind of situation. What's Jupiter the ruler of? It's the ruler of the seventh. And oh, that's fascinating. The daddy issues, because we know that Judy Garland married more than one man who was quite a bit older than her. Vincente Minnelli was older and also was gay. Like, just exactly like her father. That's fascinating. And then where's the Pisces? Oh, it's intercepted here in the 10th, right? And they were performers and they were trying to make it. They were trying to make it on the vaudeville circuit. Judy Garland was a sister act with her children, the Gum sisters. Her name is Frances Gum. Okay, so that's an interesting thing. So that Jupiter, and also note that the ruler of the so mother, what we would look at for mother. One of the things when we get there with mother, we'll look at this moon, but Jupiter, that's the other Sagittarius, the other Jupiter sign. So I was looking for, so ruler of the seventh, ruler of Pisces in the 10th. Obviously that's some kind of connection to but that's mother, but that's also connection to the outside world and to profession and to achievement. So that the part of father is on this issue of achievement, also the cusp of that's fascinating. Okay, great. So we can see there's a difference. Who's the ruler of that? It's this Venus. And so really, this is more compact, this is kind of compact. And we've got this Sun Mars opposition, which is definitely showing what should be going on with the father. And then the other one would be this Venus, right? And so what's happening with her? Not really anything, right? Because she's not really, she's kind of on her own. All of this stuff is kind of looking at it. She's already left shall we say, she's left the square. Oh, and there is a reception, a mutual reception of sorts between Venus and Jupiter. Venus is in the exaltation of Jupiter. Jupiter is in the domicile of Venus. So just think about that as an example. These are the two things that tell us about Father, right? These are the two things that tell us about Father. One of the things, think with Ruth Slanzinska, we see that one of the things that we know about Father was that the Father was obsessed with the child, right? The ruler of the ascendant was on the part of Father, right? The ruler of the ascendant was on the part of Father. And so that we can see that and everything, and then we saw that the significator was in the sign of her, the house of her hands, and he was obsessed with what was the progress of her playing, right? So here we've got a different kind of thing. We've got a different. We have a different humor. This father has a different humor. This father's got a recklessness, right? The Sun Mars opposition is reckless. Sagittarius, Mars and Sagittarius, reckless. There's a recklessness. It's not affecting the child necessarily. And then, so in this particular case, here's the child, right? Here's the child, Mercury and Moon, right? Here's the child. Really, it's affecting himself. He's kind of off into his own thing. All of this stuff is, except for the Jupiters in the fifth, this stuff, oh, well, really all that stuff's with, not, yeah, Jupiter is really the only thing that is worthy of the fifth. The Saturn is still at the end of the fourth. So that stuff's in the fourth, but Jupiter's in the fifth. So even that, I mean, this, she loved her father. She adored her father. She was really upset when he went away. She wanted to share her successes with him. I mean, he really believed in, he obviously believed in her success as well and wanted her to do really well. And so, this Jupiterian, I think, oh, well, here's the difference, right? What's the difference between seeing Saturn on the cusp, or not on the cusp, but on the part of father, right? As a natural significator, right? Dun, 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 Saturn, right? Saturn, right? Not malefic, bad malefic. And then seeing Jupiter on the cusp, not on the cusp, but on the part of father, which is the great benefic. And then in this reception with Venus, which is also music, right? And Libra is aesthetics, and so the ideas and aesthetics and all that stuff. And this guy was a musician as well as a singer and a musician. So I think that that's really fascinating. I think that that's just looking at the significators, right? So that was so we just looked at technique one, just looking at the significators. Now, if we look, find who is the person in charge of those things? Who's the winner? So we're looking at 28 degrees of Leo. It's Sun, Sun, Mars, Mars, Sun, Sun, Mars, Mars, Sun, Sun, Mars, Mars. Sun, Sun. That's something to look at. These, when you look at these essential dignities and you see an aspect, are the planet, you can pick out the aspect as one of the five planets. There's only two planets that rule that degree in the daytime. Sun and Mars are the only two planets that rule this degree. That's fascinating. Who's the winner? Sun, right? So Sun is the winner. So that, all right. So he's not that close to the cusp. Neither of them are, right? But still, he's the winner. All right. So then what are we looking at next? Then Sun, 19 Gemini, Mercury, Saturn, Mars gets 3 points. Mercury gets five. Saturn gets three. Okay, so Mercury is the winner here. This is the other significator for him, right? For that. So, and look, there's this square. Actually, Mercury is leaving the square from Saturn and going to the opposition of the moon. Moon and Mercury are mutually applying in this chart. Okay, so that's the ruler of the sun, right? He's the one of the significators, and then the next ruler is, what is it? 10 degrees of Libra. 10 degrees of Libra. Venus, Saturn, Mercury, Moon. What to the 10th degree, right? So Mercury, Moon. Okay, so it's Saturn is the winner. That's the other side of this. Moon, Mercury, and Saturn. All of a sudden, we've got a new different thing. Now look at this. This Saturn is probably the winner, right? Because the Saturn is exalted and he's close to he's not within, yeah, he's within 3 degrees of the cusp, even though oh no, he's not, sorry, but he's in the fourth, he's in an angle. And so I think that would be it, right? And maybe we would look at the mutant for the what was it, for the ruler of the yeah, for the ruler of the for Venus, right? But we don't. We've got everything is kind of pointing at this system and the things involved with it. This square that's separating between Venus and Jupiter, this square that's separating between Mercury and Saturn, right? And maybe that's craft and technique and knowledge and know-how. But note that the Saturn doesn't receive the Mercury. And Saturn doesn't receive the Mercury because it's in Cancer. So let's see what that's Mercury. Saturn is so Saturn here rules eighth, ninth, and tenth, or in this case, it would be fifth, sixth, and seventh from the fourth if we're looking at it from father that way. Or what would it be? Third, fourth, and fifth if we're looking at the ascendant Libra as the ascendant. But anyway, Saturn Mercury. Oh, Mercury's the ascendant. So maybe that could be the estranged. Not, they weren't estranged, but maybe that would be him leaving the rest of the family. That's interesting. Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant, and Virgo is intercepted, and Virgo is intercepted in the fourth. So fourth, that could definitely be the leaving the family, right? That square. Because there's a lack of reception between because if this is significant, if we're using this as the significator for father, then that means that it doesn't receive the family and the child. And so he did go ahead and they separated, right? They're separating. How fucking fascinating. Okay, so that's two. We've decided that Saturn is the significator for father if we look for the almutens. If we're looking for almutens, that this is the significator that we would use. And from that, we've deduced possibly using once again this idea of using this idea of what we would do with the reception, right? This is a square, which squares can be very useful. Mercury and Saturn are the two rulers of the air triplicity, so those two can work together well. And a square could be very fucking useful, but not when one of the signs is in a sign that it doesn't like. And so that would make more tension. That would create more tension. Interesting. So that's the second technique. This Saturn becomes the significator for the father. How interesting. Okay. Then the next thing is, and see, I'm discovering this all myself too. The next thing is, who's the high leg? And that was based on what? The fourth house, the part of father, and the son. Right? It was just those four. Maybe the part of father and his Lord or something. But maybe the fourth house is Lord, the part of father and his son. So let's just look at those three. So the sun is definitely applying to the fourth house, so that's a possibility. The what is it? The 10 degrees of Libra. Oh, this is definitely, and then the Saturn is here, right? That's the exaltation ruler, 10 degrees of Libra. And then the third would be the sun. Getting anything from Mercury? No. Anything from Mercury? No. So anything from Saturn? Kinda, yeah, so it could work. I think the best one is this one, is the part of father. I think that's the high leg, the high leg of the father. Look at all of this stuff, all of this stuff in Libra, the Venus Jupiter that we were just talking about. This, even though it's super wide and separating, this Venus Jupiter that we were talking about. I like this way of looking at aspects. The three ways. Once again, three ways. There's what's applying, like here between the Sun and the Mars. That's an applying aspect. There's what's separating. The really recent separation is between Mercury, who's retrograde, and Saturn, who isn't. Right? So Mercury's separating, going away from the Saturn. And then the wider separating aspect is between Jupiter and Venus. But once again, it's degrees of influence that we're talking about, and then going back, and then going on from that is when you get into wide whole sign related type things. But I think that this is really the best aspect. And we can even see here from the Rahu, Rahu will create things that are out of what's the word, the term that one uses? Rahu will create men or people who are unusual, or people who will go outside of the bounds of propriety, who are unusual, go outside of the bounds of propriety. What's the word? Unconventional, unconventional. So there is that, even that whole, and remember that was the other. So we've got that unconventionality of the father, the benevolence of the father. This is a nice guy, but there's this unconventionality. There's a talent, unconventionality, benevolence to this father. And then, of course, we see the between the father and the child and the family. We see kind of this can maybe be a describer of the father. The Venus and the because of the Venus because it's the ruler of the father, a ruler of the part of father, the Venus Jupiter, even though Saturn is the winner, right? But the Venus Jupiter becomes another kind of way of describing, and then this. So our two significators are the Saturn and the 10 degrees of Libra part of father. Okay, so it's a little bit of a slog, but it's a way to kind of be looking at these things and to kind of seeing them. We see two completely different charts, two completely different attitudes toward father, or attitudes of father to child. Oh, that last one, the relationship between the ruler of the fourth and the ruler of the first. So there is no relationship, and which kind of on a certain point makes sense, right? Even though the father is in the sign of the child, of the rule of the child, so we can see that the father was thinking about the child all the time, right? Or possibly that the father was in that the child was in the person's mind, the father's mind. Um, but at the same time, this Mercury was consumed more by what was going on with the mother, as we can see, because the Venus is the significator for mother by day. They're both in the same sign. So anyway, so that's our father thing. I've thought it for myself. Just it was really useful, and I hope that you will find it useful too.